Welcome back to the Vanessa G Fitcast. I'm Vanessa Pozos, and here with me is Omar Pozos, my co-host and husband. And today we're coming back from a really fun retreat we just had with our
weekend.
Our Forever Fit clients. Once a year, we bring out our Forever Fit clients, which Forever Fit is our highest level program. And so we invite our ladies out for kind of a weekend retreat on us. So we spend the weekend together at this incredible beach house, doing a ton of self-development, doing some in-person kind of workouts, working on form, mobility with our movement expert, our head training programmer. We get incredible meals with our in-house chef. And we just connect, hang out, really just try and facilitate a lot of breakthroughs. And I just come back from those retreats feeling so incredibly fulfilled and excited, and just all the messages I get from clients talking about how wonderful it was. I'm in a great mood. How are you doing, Omar?
I'm doing great. Yeah. To kind of piggyback off your point, listen, when you have a huge house by the beach with a private chef with just an intimate room of like connections and vulnerability, there's just nothing bad that can come out of that. But to your point, I think what's one of my favorite parts is, that experience of just being around like-minded people that understand, that know what you're going through, and most importantly, that can relate. And they're like, hey, listen, I've been where you're at. I'm trying to do the same things that you are, or, hey, this is what worked for me in the past. Here's a piece of advice or insight that I can offer. Again, I think to me, that's the most valuable aspect. And of course, coaches and everybody being around, but it's just the fact that you're like, oh, okay, I'm not alone in this situation, and I can kind of breathe and relax a little bit because I know that other people are going through it. To me, that's my favorite part. And honestly, I think it's the most valuable. But
absolutely. Yeah. On today's episode, I want to have a little bit of a conversation around something that's felt very relevant lately. I've had a few clients that are feeling really just kind of stuck in their life right now. So like not even necessarily within their health and fitness journey, but just purely within their life. And I find this comes up a lot with women who maybe are dealing with hormonal imbalances, especially if we've had some cortisol issues. It's very, very common for our nervous system to be really, really stuck in that like fight or flight, or even more in this situation, I almost call it more of a freeze state where you literally feel stuck. You feel frozen. Even the tiniest actions like emptying out the dishwasher, doing the laundry, like tiny things that you're like, this should not feel like such a mountain to climb. It feels so hard. You feel so overwhelmed. You feel so stuck. And so it's like in those types of things feel stuck, then of course, like our health and fitness actions feel really hard and feel absolutely impossible. Even something as simple as like communicating with a coach, maybe doing kind of like our weekly check-in, things like that can start to feel super overwhelming and hard. And when we find ourselves in that kind of crossroad, that position where it's like, I feel so stuck and I know I want to get myself out of this place. I know I need to get myself out of this place, but it's really feeling hard. Like you feel like you're just stuck in the sludge, in the mud. This is where I'm really passionate about this type of work and doing a lot of the mindset work and really helping our nervous systems kind of get centered again so that we can continue to take those actions and move forward and not allow it to just kind of keep us derailed forever, right? Allow it to just be like a period of time that we're in and then be able to move through it and get to the other side. So I had a client example that I wanted to kind of bring to this episode. So, one client who has had a lot going on in her personal life, a lot of things within her work, within her family, her personal life, and it just kind of feels like life is completely working against her right now. And she's, continued to communicate with her one-on-one coach and, with myself, and like she's been communicative, but she still has felt very much like I'm not doing enough. She is definitely a high performer, and she definitely is holding herself to a high standard. So she's finding herself kind of beating herself up. And so this week, her coach had asked her a question around, when she was feeling a lot of overwhelm. She asked her a question, something along the lines of, what does she think that she could maybe do kind of like action behavior wise to start to kind of move through some of that overwhelm a little bit here. And when, the client had kind of like thought about it, she came back and she kind of was just like, starting to have a little bit of that emotional breakdown that we all find ourselves in sometimes, where we feel just completely trapped in our emotions, like completely just absolute like anxiety, kind of maybe heading more towards depression, like a lot of sadness, a lot of tears, like really, really having that physical response even in our body. And she was kind of relaying that and expressing that she's kind of in that place right now. And she said herself of like, I don't know. I don't know what's going to make me feel better. I don't know what I can do. Like, I don't know. And I feel kind of like stressed and sad about the fact that like, I don't know. And so she was kind of stuck in this like spiral there. Mm-hmm. So that's where I figured, the message that I had kind of worked with our coach, like we had kind of both together sent her a message. I was thinking, this message could probably be helpful for a lot of people. I think a lot of women who maybe resonate with these types of things, maybe they're feeling stuck in their own life, they might find that pieces of this are really helpful for them. So I wanted to bring it here to the podcast and share a little bit of what I had said. And then we can kind of talk through some of the ways that you can help yourself when you're in this situation.
Yeah, I'm excited for you to share this, Ness, because being from like in our relationship with you having gone through a lot of these things, it is extremely hard. I can imagine not just for the person, but others around them too, because I know you mentioned the one thing that kind of caught my attention was you were like, sometimes I don't even know how to explain myself or explain what it is that I need in particular. And as a partner, as your husband, like that's been something that you and I have always really struggled with, because I'm like, look, how can we fix it? How can I help? And you're like, and this is where I think I was about to start mocking the crying, but not a good idea. This is where, it's hard and it's challenging, because you're like, if I don't even know what I want, I'm like, okay, well then I don't even know how to help you. So I think at times just hearing a different perspective, especially with your experience and what you've gone through, I think it's going to be super powerful. So yeah, share away. What you got for us?
Yeah. Cause and kind of going off that too, it's like when you're in that place where it's like your nervous system is so riled up, and it could be that like might have been like a slow build, like a something where you just suddenly find yourself there one day, and it wasn't like this like thing that just turned overnight of like, yesterday I was feeling amazing and today I feel terrible. It is typically a slow, gradual thing. It's like an analogy I read recently that I think is super relevant to this is like if you go to if you put a frog in cold water, it'll happily just swim around and be nice and happy. If you put a frog into a bucket of boiling water, it'll immediately jump out to save itself. But if you put into a frog into a bucket of cool water and then you slowly raise it to a boil, it won't save itself. It'll never realize it until it's too late.
Oh, wow.
That's, I think, probably is such a strange analogy to bring to this. But when I read that, I was like, that perfectly describes how we can find ourselves in this nervous system state where we just feel absolutely suddenly stuck and feel just stuck in the mud. It's such a slow, gradual build. You don't even like realize until you've gotten there. And then it feels like impossible to save yourself at that point. That's where our coaches are so great with this, and just kind of tooting our own horn a little bit. This is where as long as we can continue to communicate with the client, which can sometimes be the hardest part of like really turning inward, we'll always kind of continue to put our hand out until they're in a place where they feel ready to reach out and to communicate. Or some clients are great at continuing to communicate through this type of free state in their nervous system. But as long as we can communicate, we can typically pull them out of this. And so I want to kind of offer this message here, share this with the listeners to kind of give an example of, in this situation for this one client, how I started to help her work through these things. So again, she had sent a message kind of, expressing how she was feeling and where she was at, and just like expressing a lot of the things that she's experiencing right now, and kind of expressing of like feeling super overwhelmed to where she can't even answer that kind of like an open-ended question of, what do you think we can kind of do? Like open-ended questions when you're in this place are really hard to answer. So I kind of came back and I said, you know what, it's okay to not know the answer to that question around what's going to make you feel better. And it's okay to feel sad about that too. Like, we will continue to offer these types of questions because at the end of the day, you do have the answers within you. Sometimes it just takes letting those questions kind of roll around in your subconscious for those answers to present themselves, for that like inner wisdom within you to have an opportunity to come up and offer those answers, which is just hard to do when we're in that free state. And I told her, I'm so glad that you are still taking the space to complete your check-in and to kind of watch our check-in videos and kind of receive our feedback and message back with us about what's on your mind and what emotions you're experiencing right now. Because sometimes we just need others to reflect some different thought options and some different viewpoints to help us break out of our own thought patterns. Because Side note, that is a big part of what can keep us stuck, is when our thoughts start to spiral, getting really negative, and we're kind of compounding the pain and things are getting worse and worse. And so that's what I was expressing to her here. And then I went on to tell her, the first thing I want to remind you is that we are not our thoughts. We are the creator of our thoughts. We are not what they say. Our thoughts are just things that our brain is offering to us at that time. So when, you're having thoughts like, I don't feel like I can do anything, and, no one wants me, and when I try, I just get knocked back down. And these are thoughts that I know a lot of us can resonate with here. With this client was expressing some of those thoughts within her message, and she wasn't labeling them as like, I am thinking this. This was just her kind of brain dumping and expressing what's on her mind right now, what's on her mind, what's on her heart. And we were able to reflect that back and pull that out of her. So as I was kind of reminding her of like, you're having these thoughts, I told her we have to remember that those are simply stories that your brain is offering. And it's so good for us just to write those down or type those thoughts out like she did here in that message back to us, and just get curious about why your brain is offering those thoughts to you. Like, what purpose are those thoughts actually serving? Because everything our brain does, every thought that comes up, it is to protect us on some level or another. And it might not be clear why that is. It might feel like, man, that's a twisted way to protect ourselves. But that is what your brain is ultimately doing. So like I told her, when I've had thoughts like this, I've been able to actually trace it back to, often it comes from like a deeper subconscious level around my worth and my value, and like this belief around my worth and my value being connected to my work. So like the thoughts that she was kind of expressing of like, I don't feel like I can do anything, and like, I don't feel like I can do anything right. I just keep getting knocked back down. I'm like, I resonate with that. I've had those kinds of thoughts. And typically for me, those conscious thoughts are fueled by this subconscious belief that, again, my value, my worth is tied to my work and the things that are happening around me. And so I then feel less worthy and less valuable when things aren't going well around me. When like my circumstances, whether it's in my work, my personal life, whatever it is, when things are hard, when life is throwing the challenges at me, I feel less good about myself. And so it's that deeper subconscious belief is what leads my conscious thoughts to become unsupportive and unloving towards myself. And my brain then starts to find more and more evidence to support that story being true. So kind of pausing here again, if we are having this kind of thought pattern of like, I don't feel like I can do anything, and that's probably also leading to some other thoughts that you may not even like really be acknowledging, but like you might very quickly be having some thoughts that are just like really negative and unsupporting, unloving toward yourself. That's where now our brain is going to look for more evidence of that thought, because if that thought's on our mind, if that's like what's we're thinking about, your brain is actually going to use, all of your senses. So your eyes, your ears are looking for evidence of that thought because that's what's on your mind.
Yeah, what is the principle?
Reticular activating system.
Yes, exactly. But the other thing too is, and I love this perspective because I think sometimes when you are in that place of like fight or flight, or you are frozen and you're feeling stuck and overwhelmed, the last thing you want to do is slow down. And you're like, actually, I need to move faster because I need to get more done. I need to do this. I need to, I'm already behind at work. I'm already behind, with personal life and my kids and this and that. But honestly, just that perspective of sitting down for a second and being like, hey, you are not your thoughts. You're the creator of those thoughts, and therefore you choose to have them. And sometimes they can be helpful and sometimes not so helpful. I think that's huge. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to hear, myself included, because we all get stuck in the busyness of life, whether it's, work or personal life or, social media, whatever, and everything happens so fast. And all of a sudden you're like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I, looking for these things? Why am I looking for these examples in my life? And again, it goes back to the fact that, like you were saying, Ness, it's your thoughts or your brain offers you the easiest thing to help and make you feel safe. And sometimes it's not the most helpful, but just differentiating that, listening to something like this, or just having a different perspective can be so powerful, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's where, with this client being able to send this message and expressing kind of what's on her mind, what's on her heart, what is she feeling right now, we are able to kind of pull things out and reflect that back of like, hey, it sounds like this is a thought that you're having. It sounds like this is a thought that you're having. And even just kind of holding up that mirror and showing her a little bit of like bringing some awareness around what we are thinking, that is absolutely so important. And so like in this instance, I was explaining a little bit again of like how I recognize that for myself in the past, especially, I've gone down those patterns of having these unloving thoughts towards myself. And a lot of times it kind of coming back to, my tying my worth and my value to what's happening in my work. So there are, of course, always going to be circumstances purely outside of my control. And it's like, then I feel like I'm riding this emotional roller coaster, because it's like when things are going well, we're having fun on the roller coaster. When things are not going well, we are like riding the scary part of the roller coaster. And like, just you completely lose that sense of control within your life, and it feels scary. It feels terrible to be in that place. And that's where typically, for myself especially, I find that like my brain is almost, again, coming back to like your brain is always doing things to protect you. My brain, from this place of trying to protect me, trying to help me, trying to save me, it will almost like bully me a little bit with these thoughts of like, you need to work harder, you need to do more, you're not doing enough, coming from this place of trying to like get me to take these actions. But then what happens, those thoughts cause me to be frozen and be stuck in this place of like sadness or fear or anxiety. And so ultimately I have to consciously choose other thoughts that are more supportive and more loving toward myself. I don't have to do like a full 180, but just like slightly more loving, slightly less just bullying towards myself, so that I can really give myself that love that I ultimately, like, it's coming back to that place of value and worth and love, and not being deserving, not being, enough to deserve love externally. If we can give ourselves that love internally, we don't seek it externally as much.
So correct me if I'm wrong, and I just want to clarify, because I've never experienced anything like this, and I know it's hard, and I think it's also very hard for others to listen and be like, what are you talking about, right? So it sounds like at this point, when you are in this situation, like you were saying, you kind of turn and you're like, okay, well, what do I need to do to get out of this situation? I need to do more. I need to be more active. I need to work out harder, do this, do that, right? But it sounds like just the sheer fact of you being like, oh my gosh, I have to do all these things, it continues to freeze you to the point where now you're frustrated because you're like, why am I not being able to do this? And I think part of that too comes from people being like, well, I'm just not motivated enough, or I'm just not disciplined enough. But it's this never-ending cycle until you give yourself a little permission. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, from like what you were saying there in the beginning of like, I need to do more, it's like not even quite that place, because it's truly like you feel so stuck. You're like, I can't do anything.
Okay.
You just feel like getting out of bed sometimes is like hard. Just like, you feel like you are just go all day long, doing all the things and like constantly reactive to everything that's happening, to where you can't be proactive to do things that are good for yourself, like exercising, like, making great food choices, or tracking food, or, talking with a coach about things. Like, all of that feels so hard and impossible, because you feel like you're just reactive all day long, just like responding to whatever's coming up in your life around you. And that's where it gets so freaking hard. And so like I went on to tell this client, as well as I was kind of reflecting for her of like when I've had these kinds of thoughts and like how it's been, in my own experience a little bit. I told her, like, in those instances, I will remind myself that my value and my worth never changes as a human based on what is happening around me.
Wow.
As long as,
I like that.
Yeah, as long as my heart is good, then my worth has not changed. And that's a big thing that I've had to learn, had to really teach myself, is that even if, let's say I did something, let's say I took an action, I made a decision, whatever it is, and the outcome that came from that maybe has been, my fault, essentially, and the outcome was not good, and I'm like really stressed about what is happening and like what's currently happening right now, whether it's in my work or my personal life or anything, within my health and fitness. I can feel that responsibility of like, man, I took that action, or I didn't take that action, and now here I am with this outcome, and I can find myself beating myself up over it, or I can remind myself that, my intention with that, like if I look back and I acknowledge what was my intention behind how I took the action, or how I didn't take the action, or whatever it was that like caused the current circumstance I'm in, if I know that my heart was good and I understand what was causing me, like what was the intentionality behind that action, even if it was something as simple as like I was just trying to like protect myself because I was stuck in this place of fight or flight, and in a way that is loving, that is caring for yourself, then I can understand that like, it's okay. my worth has not changed. My heart is still good. And even though the circumstances around me aren't ideal and aren't exactly what I would like to be happening, if I beat myself up for like the role I played in creating these circumstances, I'm only going to continue to keep myself stuck because of what those thoughts are going to do to my nervous system. I am essentially attacking myself internally. And so my body feels like it's under attack.
Yeah.
And, so I reminded her too of like, what others say and do, what is happening in my work, it really has no impact on my worth. My worth has not changed, but it's so easy to let that seep in subconsciously. And that's why I have to take the moment to just name what is happening and just acknowledge that my brain is going to that place, that my brain is going there. Is again, coming back to like, we are not our thoughts. Our thoughts are just things that our brain is offering us, and kind of separating ourselves from that a little bit.
Yeah. Can you talk and you don't have to go super deep into it, but like, what are some ways that you remind yourself of your value, of your worth, when you go through these things?
Yeah, well, that's where it's like I'll remind myself when I'm thinking about like value and worth. I think a lot of times we think of like our value in like specific roles that we carry. Cause like I could look at my value, my worth as, a CEO. Like I'm a CEO of our company, Vital Spark Coaching, and I could analyze my value and worth objectively. And like, as in a position like that, there are things that are undeniably used to evaluate my worth. Like if I were to say, let's go, I want to go get a CEO job at another company. If I'm applying for that company, my worth, my value to them is going to be tied back to the things I have and have not done, and things like that. But that is my worth and my value within that role. That is not my worth as a human and who I am. And we often get those two things interchanged. So what I'm kind of like more so getting at here of like when I talk about like to your question of how do I kind of remind myself of that? How do I pull myself back to that? Is truly reminding myself that like, I do not have to earn love. As long as my heart is good, and only I know if my heart is good, but I know deep down that my heart is good, then I know that my value and my worth is there and cannot be touched, cannot be changed, regardless of what's happening around me, regardless of what other people say or do. I know that I am valuable and I am worthy. Just like if a baby is born or, you adopt a puppy, you don't look at that puppy or that baby and say, okay, let's see if they're going to be deserving of my love or not. Let me wait until they earn my love. No, they inherently are already lovable. You already love them just for who they are. It's the same thing with ourselves. We have to truly just love ourselves and feel deserving of love just for who we are, not for what we're doing, not for our actions, our behaviors, and things like that. And so the more, like what I was kind of telling her as well, the more we can just become aware of what's happening in our mind at all times, the more we can acknowledge what thoughts are hurting us. And that's what we ultimately were kind of bringing her towards, is like, you're doing the work. Like we are right now, just by her messaging us, just by her expressing what is on her heart and on her mind, not necessarily seeing it as like, I'm doing this like mindset work, but purely just sharing with us what she's experiencing. That's what she's doing. She is expressing thoughts. And oftentimes those thoughts might sound like, I just feel like XYZ. I think that's how a lot of us express our thoughts when we're like, I'm having these like thoughts that are troubling me. Oftentimes that's what it starts with. It's just like, I just feel like enter thought. Yeah. And so we can reflect that back to her of like, can you see that like this is a thought that you're currently experiencing? Can you see how maybe that thought might be making your experience feel harder than it is right now, and continuing to keep ourselves in fight or flight? And just by bringing awareness to the thought, the same way if I point out that like you're sitting on a thumbtack and you're like, oh, I've been like complaining about how I've been like sitting in pain, like my butt's been hurting me. And I'm like, oh, well, there's a thumbtack on that chair. You're not going to continue to sit on the thumbtack. As soon as you're aware of what's causing the pain, you're instantly, without like actually thinking about it, you're just going to get right off that thumbtack, because we want to save ourselves. The same thing tends to happen if we bring awareness to our thoughts and we point out like, your thought is the thumbtack you're sitting on. Your thought is causing pain for you. It doesn't necessarily always take this conscious work. It sometimes just starts to happen automatically if you start to just notice and actually just think differently because of that.
Yeah. I think sometimes even for myself, I'm like, oh, there's my brain like offering me these thoughts. And then it's up to me whether or not I choose to believe them or take them, for what they are.
Yeah, exactly. But, let's let's say, okay, well, what about when, of all this, of course, it's easier said than done. So like what I told her as well is, when I have a circumstance that just undeniably sucks and it's like nothing is going to make it better no matter how I think about it. Like I can think any which way about this circumstance and it's not going to make things better. Like it's a crappy circumstance. Well, that's where I just have to allow myself to kind of be with the suck of that situation. And I simply will ask myself in those situations, how can I support myself while I'm waiting for circumstances to get better? Because that question alone also kind of offers to your brain the idea that this circumstance is not forever. Yeah. This circumstance will come to an end. Things will change because that's life. Life has highs and lows. So if you're in the low, trust that there will be a high coming soon. And sometimes we just have to allow ourselves to ride out that low and then ask ourselves repeatedly over and over again, how can I support myself while I'm waiting for circumstances to get better? And we might not always have the question just readily available to us. It might not pop up immediately when we ask ourselves that, but the more we ask ourselves, the more our brain is going to continue to offer potential answers because that's what the brain does. The brain likes to answer questions. So one thing I might do in these kinds of instances, especially if I feel stuck in fight or flight mode, and especially if I'm really in my head a lot, which you'll kind of notice of like you feel like you just have these spiraling thoughts, you feel super anxious, then in that instance, we're in our head. What do we need to do? We need to drop into our body. And so I told her, like, this is when I will drop into my body and I'll do a scan of the feeling. I will name what it is I'm feeling. We might even pull up like feelingswheel.com, which can make it really useful to like find the feeling, like what feeling are you currently experiencing? So I'll name the feeling and then I will name where am I feeling that feeling in my body? Like quite literally, where is it located? So like this client had expressed, she was expressing, she wasn't even saying like, oh, I feel X emotion and I am feeling it here in my body. But naturally, as she was kind of brain dumping what was on her mind, expressing how she was feeling, she mentioned like, I'm feeling so overwhelmed right now. Like I feel this tightness in my chest. So she's doing it. She is doing the work without even trying, just by staying communicative with us. And so she expressed again, like she's feeling this in her chest. And so what I might also do in this situation is I'll describe, what does it feel like? Is it moving? I'll describe kind of what does it look like if I close my eyes and I really picture that emotion living in my body. I'll put a color to it. I'll describe the texture. Is it moving? Is it flowing? Is it pulsing? Kind of like describe it. And the more descriptions we can bring to it, the more we're getting out of our head, we're getting away from the spiraling thoughts, and we're actually getting centered into our body. And what that's doing is it's helping calm your nervous system. It's helping bring your nervous system back to that more settled state. And that's where we can start to feel just like a little bit better, to where now we can start to take some actions from that place that are going to be more loving, more supportive. I don't want to I don't want to make this sound like this is some super simple, easy thing to do when you're in this place. It's not. Like, it can feel excruciating to try and do this work on those crazy days where you just feel like you can't do anything, where you feel like you can't even breathe. Like, it's hard. It is hard to do this. But for myself, I know that if I don't do this work, then I will just continue to jump from one thing to the next until I suddenly get to the end of the day and I just feel terrible. And I told that to this client. I was like, that's what would happen with me. And it sounds like that was her experience the day that she sent this message.
And I think that situation's hard too. So you got to kind of pick your heart a little bit and be like, look, I can either keep doing the same things or keep burning myself out and continue to be frustrated, anxious, whatever the feeling is for you, or I can just take a minute and go through something like this. And most importantly, what it does is, to me, it almost like puts the feeling, that thought, in third person, where it's like allows you to differentiate, be like, that's not me. That's just what my brain is.
You're separating yourself from it. Exactly. Yeah. And so it's like when everything is telling you just like, I don't have time for this, that is when we have to just override that thought, override that feeling of I don't have time for this, and just force ourselves a little bit to do it. And I know it's easier said than done, but when we can start to realize that just it's the only thing that's going to get us out of that loop. And if we want to get out of that loop, we have to kind of just take that step and take that action of truly just doing that body scan, that emotion scan, and dropping into our bodies. Because once we're in even just like a slightly more common-centered state, then we can start to slow our thoughts down enough to bring in some curiosity. And that's what I went on to tell her. And we can still let those thoughts and feelings be there, but we can ensure that we're no longer reacting from those feelings. And we're start to building in more of that healthy sense of control around our circumstances rather than feeling like so out of control, like we're just like in this tornado of things happening around us within our life. And I told her, this all might sound so much easier said than done, but I told her, you are already doing all of this work though. I reflected back to her, like you had named what you were feeling in that message. She described throughout the message, like she had mentioned feeling overwhelmed. She had mentioned feeling sad, feeling defeated, feeling alone, feeling terrified. She was doing it. She was naming the emotions already. She needed us to reflect that back to her, but she is doing the work. And she, like I said, she described how some of that was feeling in her body. She described that her chest was feeling tight. She acknowledged a lot of the thoughts that she was having. And she, again, it's not like she was writing them out as like, let me do this thought download and let me like get clear on what thoughts are on my mind. She was just writing to us. She was just brain dumping. And within that, she's expressing a lot of these thoughts that she's having around, no one wants me. I need to be better in everything. I just can't win. Like those are thoughts that she's having on her mind. And so I remind her, like, you're doing the work and you're doing it beautifully. It reminds me of the quote, the moment you realize that you are not present is the moment that you are present. How often do we beat ourselves up because we're thinking like, I can't, I can't slow down. I can't be mindful. I can't do all these things, but maybe you're expressing it to somebody. And in that moment that you actually are expressing it to somebody, whether it is like a coach, like for, these kinds of clients that I'm sharing about, or if you have somebody in your life who you can talk to about this stuff, the moment that you are acknowledging that you are not present is the moment that you are being present. And so you're doing the work. You are. I'm talking to you listening to this episode too. If this resonates with you, I promise that you are doing the work at certain points in time. You just may not be realizing it. And we need to kind of celebrate and acknowledge that a little bit more. And so I told her, describing her thoughts and feelings in this message, that is you practicing mindfulness. And again, the more we become mindful and aware of what's happening in our mind, the more we can acknowledge what thoughts are hurting us and start to find our brain naturally producing other thoughts. And the last thing I told her is the circumstances are hard right now, and there isn't a lot we can change about that in the moment. What I ultimately want to help you with is not making it feel even harder by tying your own value and your own worth to what is happening around you. And just remember that every season of life has a purpose. We might not understand the current purpose of this current season right now, but there will be a day where you look back on this and you can see the meaning in it, and you might even be grateful for parts of it. So it might feel good for you to actively choose a thought like, I'm not giving up. The woman I'll be a few years from now is counting on me. And that's an example of how we can choose a different thought. We can make it essentially like a mantra that we can repeat to ourselves after we get our nervous system to that center place, because we did the body scan, we scanned our emotions, we dropped into our body. That slowed our thoughts down enough for us to insert a thought that is more supportive, that is more loving, like that thought of, I'm not giving up. The woman I'll be a few years from now is counting on me. And that's how we can start to feel better, to where we can start to take more intentional actions from that place of feeling better.
Man, that was powerful. I know this stuff is not easy to talk about, and much less, to give people insight or give people an idea of where they should even focus. Now, I do want to ask, because I know you've kind of shared quite a bit, like, what is the one thing, Vanessa, that you would share or you would tell somebody, let's say, they don't have the situation where this client does that has you, or they have their coach that they can lean on, or maybe they don't have very much support within their own personal life. Like, if there was just one thing that you could be like, hey, I know you're going through this is where I would probably start, what would that be?
I think, like I said, if you can do like the body scan of like dropping into your emotions, that's huge. And then with, like you were saying, if you don't have someone that you can really share kind of what's on your mind, turn to a journal, start a journaling practice. And again, this is one of those things where I'm like, when you're stuck in that fight or flight or freeze state, journaling can feel like you can't ever get started with it. You can't ever do it. So how can you turn that into a tiny micro action? Can you maybe just take out your phone and can you do a voice recording to your notes app and just like spill what's on your heart and just like talk through what's on your mind, because that's one way you could do things. The goal ultimately is to get what's in your head, on your mind, out of your head, out of your mind, on paper or into a computer or phone, like Notes app, whatever it is. Just get it out of your head and hold it up to where you can literally see it. And if you don't have somebody to like help pull things out and reflect things back to, that can be tough, but you can start to do this work on your own. And I invite you, like, you can reach out to me on social media if you are resonating with this, if you're stuck in that place. You can always shoot me a message on Instagram, at Vanessa G Fitness. I've been there. I get it. I'm passionate about helping women through this place because I know how hard it is. So you always have an invitation to, drop into my DMs there as well.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. I know it's not easy to talk about these things.
Yeah. Well, I hope that this is helpful for somebody out there. If this just helps one person, then I am doing my job. And that's what ultimately we want to do with this podcast. So thank you so much for listening. If this did resonate with you, send it over to a friend. Maybe somebody else could really, really get a lot of value from listening to this. You never know if this helped you, how much this could impact somebody else. So you can do them a favor just by sharing this with them. But thank you for listening. Make sure you subscribe if you're not already. We'll be back next week with another great episode.
Bye, everybody.